Welcome, everyone. I am honored to introduce to you Dr. Allan Cole. Dr. Cole is a professor and senior associate dean for academic affairs at the University of Texas at Austin in the Steve Hicks School of Social Work. He is also a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the Dell Medical School. Dr. Cole serves on the board of directors at Power for Parkinson's. He moderates PDYs, serves as a community advocate for Parkinson's Disease Net, and is a guest contributor to the Michael J. Fox Foundation's Team Fox blog. He is also the author of 11 books, and the most recent one, Counseling Persons with Parkinson's Disease. Dr. Cole has also written and published many chapters, articles, and reviews related to social work, counseling, spirituality, and the psychology of religion. Dr. Cole's educational background includes a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy from Davidson College, a Master of Social Work from Columbia University, a Master of Divinity degree from the Princeton Seminary, and also a PhD in Practical Theology from Princeton Seminary. Dr. Cole was diagnosed with Parkinson's at the age of 48 in 2016. He is married to Tracy, and he has two wonderful daughters who are 13 and 15, named Meredith and Holly. Without further ado, thank you, Dr. Cole, for being here, and we can't wait to hear more about your story.
Well, thank you, Casey, and thanks to all of you for being here today. I'm grateful for the opportunity and the invitation from the Parkinson's Foundation of Western Pennsylvania and the great colleagues there. You do important work, and it's really a joy to be a part of it in some small part today. I'm going to share my screen here, if I may, and Casey's going to help me know if it's working. Look okay, Casey?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
All right, so I'm a teacher, and my preferred method of teaching is conversational. So I'm going to talk for a little while and then hopefully leave a little time at the end for some conversation. And then I know we have a panel discussion later on in the day that we can pick back on some of the things that maybe I don't cover. But the title of my talk today is What I'm Learning from Parkinson's, and I want to stress learning, which means that I don't have it all figured out. I am on this journey now for about 4.5 years, and I've learned some things in that time, but I've also discovered there's much more to learn. And I'm going to talk about some of what I've learned and some ways of learning that I think are important. So,
excuse me 1 minute, Dr. Cole.
Yeah,
we're not seeing the big slide.
You're not seeing the big slide.
We're not seeing it full screen.
All right, let me see what I can do about that. Let me see, hold on. Try one more time here. If not, Emily, I'll ask you to maybe take over.
Yep, if not, I am ready. Perfect.
You see it now?
Perfect.
Okay. All right.
Yes,
so
it's perfect now.
Okay, great. So here's some assumptions that are going to inform what I say today, and I think it's important to sort of set the context, so I'm going to try to do that. The first assumption is that as much as we're going to talk about Parkinson's disease, we are more than Parkinson's disease. This is a facet of our lives. It's a very central one, of course, but it doesn't exhaust who we are, what we can contribute, or who we surround ourselves with in community. So that's really important, I think, to say. The second thing I would say is that we are living with a disease, what I will call an illness, as David mentioned here a few minutes ago, and I'll talk more about that. But we're living with a condition that is oftentimes called a disease of one, which means that people with Parkinson's experience the illness differently. And that's important to say too. So what I'm sharing by virtue of my own story and journey I hope will map on in some ways to yours, but again, your story will be different. So I think sharing stories is really important. Casey alluded to my blog, PD Wise, and I established that a couple of years ago as sort of a hub for sharing experiences and stories of those living with Parkinson's, because I think that that sharing our stories helps us not only as the sharers, but also the hearers. So if I hear your story or some aspect of it, it can inform my story and my telling of my story in some ways that are efficacious for me, healing for me, but hopefully for those who hear my story too. And then again, I mentioned that we'll have some time for some questions and some comments at the end. So my journey began with a finger twitch in my left index finger one morning sitting at my desk in my office on the campus of the University of Texas at Austin. I was at my laptop doing what I often do in the mornings, which is writing. And I noticed a slight twitch in my left index finger, and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And, you know, sort of attributed it to drinking too much coffee, which I was wont to do at the time and didn't think much about it. But it continued that afternoon, it continued the next day. And so I mentioned it to my wife, Tracy, who's always been sort of our designated family member to worry about medical things. And she said, well, you know, it's probably nothing, Alan, but, you know, why don't you get it checked out? And so saw my primary care physician, who's amazing. And she said to me, Alan, I want you to see a neurologist. And so I saw a neurologist about a month later. And that's how it began. I chased a diagnosis for a little while, was misdiagnosed by one neurologist before getting a firm diagnosis from a movement disorder specialist. But on October 26, 2016 is the day that I officially joined the Parkinson's community. I was 48 years old, have two children. They were 10 and 8 at the time. Now they're 13 and 15. And so kind of cruising along in sort of midlife, mid-career, had always done the right things, quote unquote, was very active, healthy, ate right, didn't overindulge in things that you're not supposed to overindulge in. And so was sort of blindsided by this diagnosis. I tell people I was T-boned in an intersection I didn't even know I was passing through. But that's how it began for me. That's about 4.5 years ago again. And I spent about 11 months, this is really important, suffering in silence. I was, you know, in the proverbial Parkinson's closet, and a lot of reasons for that, which I can talk about, but I don't recommend that, candidly. I think, you know, being public with a Parkinson's diagnosis is always an individual decision, and people have to make their own choices. But for me, it got to the point where the silent suffering was more unbearable than I imagined being public about having Parkinson's would be. And, you know, by the way, all the fears and anxieties that I had about being public have not come to pass. In fact, just the opposite has happened. And I'll talk about some of the ways that that's happened. But for me, it was a long period of silent suffering that, you know, only exacerbated the pain that I felt with having this diagnosis. So here's some things that I'm learning. One is I want to distinguish between illness and disease. I think this is really important, and I'll say why. When we oftentimes, in my experience, focus on the disease aspect of Parkinson's, which is really sort of a way of looking more objectively at what is happening in our bodies. It's sort of a kind of a pure medical model approach. You know, we're losing dopamine in our brains. It's affecting our movement and autonomic functions, et cetera. We need to know all of that, and it's important to know that for, you know, treating Parkinson's disease. But I'm more comfortable, and I really advocate for us living more into Parkinson's as an illness. And the reason for that is that when we speak in terms of illness, we're thinking more about the sort of so what questions of the disease. And that is, how is the disease affecting me or my loved one or my friend or whomever? It's one thing to have a bunch of processes going on in your body. It's another to ask, you know, what difference is that making in your life, and what kinds of supports do you need to live better with this disease? I write in my book, in practical terms, viewing Parkinson's principally as an illness helps me hone in on the colors and contours of what my life is like day to day, moment to moment. So that's a distinction that I would offer to you to think about. We need the medical disease side, of course, but I think the illness side is just as important. And the physicians that I talk to, who in my opinion are best at their jobs, are those who really embrace the personal experience of disease, i.e. illness, in their practice. I've also learned that today is what we have, and that's true whether we have Parkinson's or another chronic or progressive illness or not. None of us is promised a tomorrow. What we have is today. And I think sometimes when we place too much of an emphasis on the future, whether that's positively or negatively, we can rob ourselves of what today might offer. And so a lot of us, when we're first diagnosed, in particular in my experience, we worry so much about the future. What am I going to be like a year from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 or 20 years from now? And what that does, at least I've discovered, is it sort of takes my sort of focus off the beauty of the day and the gift of the day and all that it's offering, because I'm so focused on the future. And I'd say that too, with respect to looking at the future more hopefully, which I do. There's a lot of wonderful things going on in research for Parkinson's and better treatments and all of that. And I'm completely plugged into that and really try to support all of that as much as I can. But I don't hang everything on there being a cure for Parkinson's in my lifetime. I'm cautiously optimistic about that happening. People that I believe who are really smart about the science tell me there's good reason for hoping for that. But I think it's good to, again, live for today as much as possible, so that we don't lose sight of what today brings. One of my favorite authors is a man by the name of Wendell Berry, and he wrote in a book titled "What Are People For?" the following. He said, "Let tomorrow come tomorrow, not by your will is the house carried through the night." And so I really hark back to that when I'm thinking too much about the future, either positively or negatively, and try to let tomorrow come tomorrow. Some other things I'm learning is that there are a lot of things that we cannot control about Parkinson's. That is our symptoms. We can control them somewhat through medication, but ultimately Parkinson's is going to have its say. But there's a lot of agency and a lot of choice and a lot of other kinds of control that I think help us all to live better with the illness. And so I think focusing on what you can control, the choices that you can make, is really key. And for me, one of the choices that I make, and I learned this from Michael J. Fox, among many other people who are on this journey, who are colleagues and friends, that one of the choices I can make is the attitude that I'm going to try to have toward living with this illness. Am I going to look at it as, sort of the worst thing that could ever happen to me, or am I going to look at it as something that is a significant hurdle and one that I will be dealing with presumably for much, if not all of my life, but again, something that is part of me and that doesn't exhaust who I am. So agency and choice and control are not completely given up just because we have Parkinson's. I'm also learning that there are a lot of misperceptions about Parkinson's and a need for educating people on it. I write about this in my new book that Casey alluded to. A few weeks after I was diagnosed, had lunch with a longtime friend and colleague who is a wonderful human and very concerned about me. And he leans over the table and says, "Allan, I'm so sorry to hear that you have Alzheimer's disease." And he caught himself and he turned 100 shades of red, and he knows the difference between Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. But as I would discover, not everyone does. And a lot of what we have to do, I think, unfortunately, but I think we have to do, is to educate people on Parkinson's, to maybe discount some of the misperceptions or correct them so that people are working with a more accurate knowledge of the illness. I've also learned that consultations can be really important, especially early on. If you're still working and you've been diagnosed, I really encourage you to see an employment law attorney and a financial planner, just to have, again, knowledge and pieces in place if and when you need them. Many of us who are diagnosed with Parkinson's work for many, many years. It's not as if we have to stop working immediately if we have Parkinson's, but I think it's good to know what your rights are and what the processes are for protecting yourselves. And then finally, I want to say that life can be good with Parkinson's, and in some ways even better. I talk a lot about this on my blog and in my book, that as difficult as Parkinson's is and will continue to be, in a lot of ways, it's enriched my life, and it's done that by bringing extraordinary people into my circles. It's given me opportunities to teach and to write and to speak in some different ways about things that I care about. And so I'm not ready yet to say that I would have signed up for Parkinson's, but it's really brought a lot of wonderful things into my life. Some of those wonderful things relate to advocacy and support, and those are 4 organizations that I'm involved with, and I really commend to you. The Parkinson's Foundation, if you're here today. Some of those others you might know about too. They don't have to be your organizations other than the foundation. They're mine, but I really encourage you to think about advocacy and reaching out for support. Many of these organizations have support groups and gatherings that meet on a regular basis. And, one of the things that was difficult for me in that, 11 months of silent suffering with my diagnosis was that I lacked community and I lacked relationships with people who were on the similar road that I was on, and missed opportunities for encouragement and support and learning from them. So I highly commend being plugged in some way to some kind of support group, because it really helps. Another way of saying that community is really important. There's a great quote by Michael J. Fox that says, I can't always control my body the way I want to, and I can't control when I feel good or when I don't. I can control how clear my mind is, and I can control how willing I am to step up if someone needs me. And what I've discovered, as I suspect you have, is that part of being in community with Parkinson's is supporting one another when we're not feeling our best, or when we're wrestling with anxiety or feeling depressed or blue. There are people there to reach out and to support us, just as we have the opportunity to reach out and support them when we're sharing the journey together. So community is a big piece for me. Another piece is what I call a passion, and I think this is important whether one has Parkinson's or not. But for me, honing my passion and really living into it has been vital for living well with Parkinson's. There's a quote there by David Brooks that I'll let you read. I won't read it for you, but essentially Brooks is saying that when we're committed to something, a role or a group of people or a cause, that's when we're toughest and most resilient. And I think that's really, really true. And so I commend to you thinking about what your passions are or have been, if you've let them slip away. And I'd encourage you to reclaim them, because I think Brooks is right. When we're living into our passions, we're really at our strongest. My major passion, besides my family, of course, and my friends, is a passion for writing. And I want to speak just briefly about that. I have a blog that's called PD Wise. You can access that at pdwise.com. It's really a hub for sharing stories about Parkinson's. I do most of the writing, but others write for the blog as well. And I'd love for you to visit it. There are a number of resources that are listed there, the Parkinson's Foundation included, that I recommend you take a look at for offering support and education and advocacy and the things that I'm talking about. And then my book, as Casey mentioned, is just off press about a month ago, just in time for Parkinson's Awareness Month. This is a book that's really about half memoir and half sort of guidebook for what I think are important things to think about when we're trying to live well with Parkinson's. It's written for counselor types, but it's really accessible for folks who are care partners or friends or family, or even, persons with Parkinson's themselves, to learn a little bit more about the illness and some of my suggestions for how to live well with it. Casey, how are we doing on time? Do we have a moment for me to read an excerpt from it as I sort of wrap up?
Yes, please do. We,
Okay.
yes, it's 11:30 and
Okay.
you're scheduled till 11:55.
Okay. I don't want to take Dan's and Karen's time and get in trouble. So, okay, so this is from the epilogue, and I'm not going to give away the end of the book, but this is toward the end of the book. To set the piece that I'm going to read, it harks back to a race I ran with a group of people who were running the Texas Independence Relay, which is a 200-mile relay from Gonzales, Texas, which is in central Texas, to Houston. And we did this on a team of 12 people. 5 of us have Parkinson's, and the others on the team are touched by Parkinson's in some way, family members, partners, friends with Parkinson's. And so the book picks up with that experience. Somewhere near the small central Texas town of Wallace, I am running my second of 3 legs in the Texas Independence Relay. It's after 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning in late March, nearly 15 months since the diagnosis that changed my life, and I haven't slept in 22 hours. I'm on a team of 12 runners. 5 of us have Parkinson's, and all of us are touched by it through spouses and partners, family members, and friends. Our team captain and my new friend, Craig Potts, also lives with Parkinson's and has brought us all together. We call ourselves Runners Against Parkinson's, and it'll take us nearly 36 hours to complete the 200-mile route, which began in the town of Gonzales and will end in Houston. We are more than halfway there. Navigating a rough dirt road, I have found a good running cadence under a clear, starlit sky. It's warm, still, and quiet, and all I hear are my feet hitting the road and the air moving rhythmically in and out of my lungs. The LED headlamp strapped over my Houston Astros baseball cap shines a few feet in front of me, illuminating the tranquil night. If I turn my head slightly to the right or left, I glimpse a first swath of the massive fields of bluebonnets. My mind wanders back over the past year and a half and to the lessons I've learned about myself and others, lessons about illness and resilience, about darkness and light. I've learned that medicine is at once miraculous and maddening, able to treat many illnesses, including Parkinson's, but not necessarily able to cure them. This reality requires you to set expectations accordingly, hoping for better treatments and a cure, believing they will come because the science says so, while recognizing that progressive illnesses progress and that to live means not betting it all on the future, but also cashing in on today. I've also discovered the incomparable healing power of living with greater openness and vulnerability, especially when tied to a measure of authenticity that you never thought was possible. We wear masks, after all, and more often than we realize. Our masks conceal our pain, but can also intensify it and allow it more of a destructive influence than it has to have. Although there are surely too many people in the world of whom we should never ask for more vulnerability, those who are poor, abused, neglected, marginalized, or victimized, many of us have much to gain by letting our guard down, at least for a bit, and allowing others to glimpse our humanity in all of its exposed and unvarnished forms. Kierkegaard asked, "Are you not aware that there comes a midnight hour when everyone must unmask? If nothing else, Parkinson's has taught me the benefits of unmasking earlier than the midnight hour." Parkinson's will never define me, but it certainly guides me. Like an LED headlamp, it illumines paths in front of me, those of illness and health, scarcity and abundance, suffering and joy, mystery and understanding. It also gets me outside of myself, points me toward others, and invites me to put PD to work on behalf of something good and life-giving. In this respect, I have learned the importance of embodying compassion, which literally means to suffer with, and joining with others to alleviate suffering. I've discovered that trying to help ease another person's pain or burden helps to lessen my own, and that all of us who travel the Parkinson's road or one like it are sturdier, more resilient, and more hopeful together. So that gives you an idea of some of the highlights of my journey thus far. I want to stop here and maybe take some questions if you have them or some comments. I want to leave with one more quote by Epicurus, who was an ancient Greek philosopher that I also have posted in lots of places that I see regularly. And he said, "Do not spoil what you have by desiring what you have not. But remember that what you now have was once among the things you only hoped for." And for me, this really resonates when I think about Parkinson's. Its burdens notwithstanding, again, it's brought a number of wonderful things into my life. Opportunities like today, in fact, to connect with extraordinary people. And I think living into that, at least for me, has been the key to trying to live with illness. So I'm going to stop there and thank you for listening. And if there are questions or comments, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Thank you, Dr. Cole. Yeah, we do have a couple questions coming in. The first is, how have you changed as a professor and dean since your diagnosis? And I know in your book you talked a little bit about, I think I'm pronouncing it right, pneumonology, kind of that firsthand experience.
Phenomenology, yes.
Yeah, has that made an effect on how you teach, how you counsel?
Yeah, well, David, thank you for the question. I tell people I was really expert and good at telling other people how to, deal with hardships in life, and I wasn't really great at taking my own counsel and advice. And so one of the things that having Parkinson's has done for me, it's made me more open and vulnerable. It's made me more willing to indulge my own sort of feelings in a more authentic way, but to be willing to try to model that for students and for other, people in my life. It's also made me much more attuned to suffering in the world. I like to think that I had eyes that saw that before Parkinson's, and I think I did to some extent. But having Parkinson's has made me see the contours and the colors again of suffering and hardship in ways that I didn't before. And I think that makes me a better human. I hope it does. And by virtue of that, a better teacher, because I'm more attuned to other people's realities in ways that I wasn't before. So those are a couple of things that come to mind.
You had also talked about the months of silence. Was there a point that finally you decided I've got to break out? And was it harder to tell family, friends, or coworkers?
Yeah, so the second part of your question, the two hardest conversations I ever had were telling my children, first telling my parents, whom I told first, before telling my children. But it was, again, about 11 months into this before I told them, or 10 months or so. And then once I told my parents and told my children, then I had to tell my boss and my colleagues, because my children, who were 10 and 8 at the time, knew. And, I wanted them to know it was okay to talk about it, that it wasn't something that we needed to hide. And, again, this is a very individual decision. I know people who tell the world immediately, and that's right for them. And I know people who don't tell anybody for, a decade or more, and that's right for them. But for me, the burden of carrying the secret, and it felt like a secret, became just too much to bear. And it really got in the way of me feeling that I was being authentic about teaching my students and teaching my children what I think is really, key to being a a human being, and that's, being authentic and having integrity and risking vulnerability. Again, all of which I prized kind of theoretically as a teacher, but didn't embrace as fully as I do now as a human. In order to do all of that, and frankly, to try to do something constructive with this, I had to be public about it. And so that's really what sort of drove me finally to be public. And since then, I've sort of, gone full out and have been, very public about it. But it's opened up wonderful relationships and opportunities with other people to hopefully help them, but certainly to learn from them and to help myself as well.
Yeah, that's great. I've gone on PDYs a number of times, and you're an incredible writer for one thing, but there's some therapeutic value, I would imagine, in you're being able to write not just about Parkinson disease, but about all the other interests and cool things that are going on.
Yeah, I mean, I joke and tell people I don't play golf, so I have to have something to do with my time, but I really believe that I write so that I know what I think and what I feel, and other people have said that too. But there's something about kind of externalizing what's going on interiorly that, at least for me, helps me sort of understand myself and understand others in the world better, I hope. And hopefully, helps other people too. I mean, people who write do that not only for themselves, but ultimately they want people to read what they write and to benefit from it. And that's certainly true for me. And so one of the things I asked myself when I was diagnosed, and particularly when I became public, was, what do I have that I can utilize to make a contribution to this beautiful community that we call the Parkinson's community? And, for me, it was writing and teaching and sort of using the resources that I have as an educator to, again, try to make a contribution. So it helps me a lot, David, and I'm grateful for that, but I hope that it helps not only me, but others as well.
Yeah. And, I understand that Parkinson's disease can be so isolating. It's kind of a way to break out of that isolation in a way too, I would imagine.
It is. And maybe as Dan and Karen will talk about, in their time, there's something that's deeply humanizing about your sort of, physical and other struggles being more on display than anyone would ever want, right? And so, a lot of people, myself included, early on have a kind of a measure of shame about, their symptoms, or kind of, standing out in crowds in ways that, most of us don't want to do. But as I've discovered in being around people with Parkinson's, some of whom are much farther down the road than I am, and really drawing inspiration from them, by virtue of them having lived with this illness for so long and lived productive and meaningful and joyous lives along the way. There's something deeply humanizing about that, and something that's quite, again, beautiful and joyous that I didn't know that first 11 months or so into this journey. And that, frankly, I wish, for that reason, among others, I wish I had become public sooner than I did. So again, I commend people for being in networks of support. I really encourage folks who aren't to tap 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 or 100 people in an organization, because I think undoubtedly it's going to make life better for you, because everybody I talk to says that it has for them.
Yeah. And do you invite folks to contribute to PDYs if they're writing, or?
Yes, I do. I mean, I write a lot for the blog, but I don't want mine to be the only voice. I mean, that's kind of missing the point. So yes, if you like to write and you think, what you're writing fits well with the scope of PDYs, send it to me. I'm Allan, ALLAN, at pdys.com, and love to chat with you.
Great. We have a couple more questions if you have a moment. One is, as a caretaker, how do I balance my life with my husband's lack of interest in his illness?
It's a great question. And the, real heroes are care partners and caretakers. Parkinson's is a family illness, as my neurologist who diagnosed me said, it's a community illness. It affects the person, but it affects the loved ones and the family as well. So what I would say, first of all, and I teach my students this, I train social workers, and a lot of what social workers do is caring for other people in various settings, but self-care is as vital a component of any of that that we think about. And so I would say, first of all, honoring your feelings is really important. It's okay to be tired and frustrated and angry, and whatever else you may be feeling in the moment. That's okay. It's human. It's understandable. Talk to someone about it, to the extent that you can. Talk with your PWP about it, your person with Parkinson's. Remind him or her that this is a partner disease and a family disease. But get your own supports and find respite. Surround yourself with people who have nothing to do with Parkinson's. I think that's important too, so that you're not, fully consumed by this illness. But allow yourself the space to take care of yourself, and really key, don't feel guilty about that. Because you're caring for yourself is also caring for your loved one. And to the extent that you are depleted, you're going to be, less able to care for the person you love.
Here's a question that was related to the story that you read about your run, and it just basically asks, were you worried about falling?
I wasn't at the time, and again, this was pretty early on. And one of the things I want to say is, I'm a runner, and I've done, since being diagnosed, a number of distance running events. But you don't have to run marathons or 200-mile relays to benefit from exercise if you have Parkinson's. In fact, there are probably, forms of exercise over the long haul that are better for you than doing some of what I've done. And so I wasn't worried about falling so much, at the time. I was, worried about some other, injury kinds of things. But as the disease progresses, of course, falls become more and more of a potential and a reality. And so that's important to keep in mind. I will tell you that I have fallen on a treadmill, and so I don't recommend that. I was actually being evaluated for my gait because I had some injuries running, and fell and broke my big toe on a treadmill. So I have fallen running, but not in the way that you might imagine. Hold on to the guardrails if you're on a treadmill. Hold on to the guardrails.
Who hasn't fallen on a treadmill? That's the bigger question.
Yeah.
Here's a question also. Casey, in her introduction, had talked a bit about your education and background in divinity. What role has your faith played in your journey?
Yeah, thank you, David, for that question. I mean, I think, many of us, maybe most of us, when we're hit with a jarring diagnosis like Parkinson's, sort of revisit, maybe visit for the first time with depth, some of the larger questions of life, right? Meaning, justice, fairness, hope, all the things that inform, for many of us, a spiritual, life or set of commitments or religious commitments, whatever the case may be. And certainly for me, that's been part and parcel with integrating this experience into my life. I'm grateful that I feel like my, faith commitments and my spirituality was helpful to doing that. And it sort of, I think, helped me come out of this in a way that continues to give me hope and encouragement. But I think these questions are inevitable for most of us. And to the extent that spirituality or religious faith is part of your life, I think it can be very helpful for coping, but also for finding meaning in the experience.
That's great. Thank you. Well, that's all the questions that we have right now. But for folks, especially as you kind of continue through the presentations today, we're going to have our panel discussion at the end where you have a chance to, re-ask the presenters individually, but also, as a panel. So thank you very much, Dr. Cole, for being a part of our program today. So we're going to move into our first break, if that's okay with everybody. We have John and Josefa Domingos, our great buddies from all over the world, from Lisbon, Portugal, Cincinnati, Ohio. So jump on, take a break if you need. Otherwise, do some exercise. See you in a bit.